Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living your life to the fullest? Are you ready and are you willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Welcome, my friends, to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I have to tell you, this is just an absolutely beautiful, sunny, spring-like morning here in beautiful California, and I hope wherever you're at, you're having an incredible morning as well. Let's get into today's topic. I have had several people contacting me lately and several other discussions with people regarding the ego. And it's brought up to me that, geez, you address the ego a lot in what you're doing. Yes, of course I do. I have to. I have to do this because the ego is the false version of us. It's a shadow, it's a mask, but it's nothing more than an illusion. Yet, most people go through their entire lifetime believing that their ego is really them. Spirituality is about releasing this false self. By letting go of the false self, we then become more reacquainted with our true self, who we really are. Because when it comes down to it, the ego is nothing more than a culmination of things like your imagination and certain memories that is constantly creating and protecting your identity. But the ego, along with your identity, is nothing more than an illusion. None of it is real, and none of it is the real you. This is why having the ability to transcend the ego is at the very heart of every authentic spiritual practice. And it's extremely obvious to see that it is only when we transcend the ego that we open the door for the ability to live a fully engaged life. When we look at the ego according to vibration and energy, we can understand just how incredibly draining the ego is on our energy. Because every day the ego is constantly reaffirming and protecting what it has created that you understand as your identity. And in this way, it is obsessed with a sense of self-importance. And it's always trying to make your identity something more and more and more. And if it runs into anything that threatens what it has created, it violently resists. And the reason for this is because the ego is incredibly fragile and incredibly insecure. Here's an example. There are some out there who, whenever they are confronted with any information, a statement, anything at all, that they perceive, usually through faulty perception, but they perceive threatens in any way their identity or the beliefs that they have created in their own mind from their mind creating all of these stories, they melt down, right? We've all heard of these people needing safe spaces and all of this kind of thing. This is because the ego has been twisted and inflated to an unsustainable level. Now, on the path of spirituality, there are some teachers who like to address the idea of transcending the ego right from the very beginning. And this is not wrong or bad, but it can lead to failure because this sort of practice can be very challenging. Indeed, it can be a little devastating to many. And I understand the logic of wanting to address this right up front. But I've seen so many good people that really want to evolve and awaken, and they fail and quit very quickly because they try to confront their ego too soon, and it's more than they can bear. This is why I like to stress the need to first develop a sense of mindfulness. And along the way, this helps you develop a warrior spirit. This is why in the book I talk about the spiritual warrior, because you have to have this warrior spirit. You have to be authentic. You have to have a warrior spirit, because this is what gives you the inner strength to face this false version of yourself. There is simply no spirituality when we are still ruled by the illusion of the ego. We need to transcend the ego in order to engage the spiritual nature of ourselves. This allows us to step out of the shadow, to drop the mask, and be authentically who we truly are. Okay, so I highly recommend that you undergo some of the practices and attain a sense of mindfulness and attain a sense of inner strength. Develop the warrior spirit before you engage any of the practices to transcend the ego. All right? I've been teaching that for years. This is episode 268. And for over 200 episodes, 250 episodes, I've been teaching you how to develop mindfulness. So, assuming that you have succeeded in that, and if you haven't, then file this episode away for later. But what I've come down to over almost 40 years of practicing and teaching the martial and spiritual traditions, and I've sought teachers from many traditions, it came down to two approaches for transcending the ego that actually work. And they're two very different approaches, kind of opposite if we want to look at them in a dualistic way. Both of them work wonderfully. There's a lot of practices out there that really don't offer much benefit. These two practices I'm going to share with you today, and we're going to discuss these, are the two that I have found to be the most effective and the easiest to work with. Now, I'm not saying these are the only two that work. I'm sure there are other ways as well. But these are the ones that I've encountered, and it is extremely evident that they are indeed effective. Now, before I get to both of these practices, I want to make sure that I cover the most common reason for failure in transcending the ego practices. And that is when you look at these practices as a fight, as a battle. And so many people do this. I know I even had teachers over the years that would tell me, we're going to go to battle, and that's going to be the most fierce battle you've ever fought. Now, they're not wrong. It can be a fierce struggle to engage these practices. But when you go in looking for a fight, you are already invoking your own ego. And just as though it's difficult, if not impossible, to solve a problem with the same mind that created it, how can we expect to transcend our ego when we are focusing all of our mental energy on the ego? And most often, this approach just leads to you bolstering your own ego, the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. So don't look at this as something hard, because the practices I'm going to share with you, while they can be challenging, they're not difficult. It is not a battle. Indeed, you're going to find that it's just the opposite. And it is when we release the ego, when we are finally able to transcend the ego, that our eyes open for the first time, and believe me, you will see life in a whole different way. It'll seem as though you are opening your eyes for the first time in your life, and you will see just how magnificent and beautiful this life actually is, because you will be looking at life through your true eyes. And when we stop allowing the ego to drain our energy, our spiritual energy, our physical energy, and we see life through the eyes of our true self, through our essence, it's common to feel as though you've had an incredible weight lifted from you, and you will feel light and filled with energy and a sense of aliveness, the likes of which you have never experienced before. Now, as I stated earlier, I like to teach the path that has you working on the development of mindfulness first. And I'm speaking of the specific, authentic practices of mindfulness, not whatever made-up story definition that one might assign to it. Okay? And the reason for this is because those authentic practices that I've been sharing for years on this very podcast lay the foundation to begin weakening the ego's hold on your mind and contain the ability to begin transcending the ego right from those practices. So I encourage you to build that foundation first. Okay, so the two main practices for overcoming the ego. Number one, dissolving it naturally through the attainment of no mind. This is what meditation actually is. This is real meditation. Because in meditation, if you are trying to do anything, it's not meditation. It's not actual meditation. It's a meditative practice, and that is very different. So if you're not sure of how they are different, please refer to a previous episode where I cover that in great detail. So you could say, well, we're trying to dissolve the ego and we're trying to go into no mind. That is a faulty perception of the practice, because in reality, with meditation in this no mind practice, you don't try to do anything. You simply sit. You allow your mind to settle. And eventually, the mind will settle and become still. And there will be silence. There will be no mental activity because you suspend the mental processes. And there will be no thoughts, no intentions, only silence. This is when you begin to attain a sense of no mind. So you don't try to do anything. You don't anticipate. You don't expect. You don't try. You just simply sit and allow everything to attain a state of utter stillness. Now, when this happens and you actually attain no mind, the ego evaporates. It dissolves away. Why? Because the ego dwells in the mind. When you reach a space where there is no mind, there is no ego. Because the ego is only a manifestation of the mind. It's nothing real. Therefore, it cannot exist outside of the mind. So when you engage in authentic meditation and you attain this state of total silence and stillness known as no mind, you will be able to feel what it is like to transcend the mind, to transcend the ego, have it dissolve away, and you will feel a sense of freedom unlike anything you've ever known. This method is a method of dissolving. So you see, you're not fighting it. You're not going to battle with it at all. You just simply allow it to dissolve away. There is no conflict this way within the practice, because you are simply being. And this is part of the heaven-earth being. Okay? You are being. You are in your true nature. You are connected to your true self. You have allowed the ego and the mind to dissolve away. And as you engage this practice, the more time that you are capable of spending in no mind, the more time you are free of the ego. And once you get a feel for this, you will want it again and again, and you will want it more, and you will want it longer, because it feels fantastic to let go of all that stuff, to release all of the illusions and the delusions and the weight that it has placed on you that you haven't even realized, and all of the other nonsense that serves to drain your life energy, your mental energy. This approach requires a great amount of perseverance and patience. So I'll be very forthcoming with this. That's why this method is considered to be so difficult by many, is because it requires us to have a sense of patience and the strength to persevere. If you have some patience and you have perseverance, then this method is not a difficult one. How long it can take is anybody's guess. Don't go in looking for the end result. Just go in addressing the practice. Just be with the practice itself, and you will get much farther, much faster. Because when it comes to any real authentic practices, there's simply no shortcuts. Okay, that's the first method. You simply sit in meditation where you won't be interrupted. Turn off the phone and everything else so there are no interruptions. And just allow your mind to settle, to become still, to become silent, to allow the suspension of all mental processes so you attain what is called no mind, what is commonly referred to in Japanese as mushin, and the ego is no longer present. Now, when you end the practice and you begin thinking again and going again, of course, it can come back. And this is why it requires perseverance. As we continue to attain no mind, we weaken the ego over time. The more time we spend outside of it, the more time we transcend it, it weakens it. Eventually, we can transcend it completely and it just won't come back anymore. Okay, so the first method is to dissolve it through no mind. Method number 2, we're going to do just the opposite. This time, I'm going to expand my sense of self to include everything and everyone in the universe. Now, that might sound a little crazy to you, but here's the logic that helps you understand how this works. The ego is responsible for us creating our identity, which creates a sense of separateness. And when we transcend the ego and connect to our essence, we return to a sense of oneness, a connection to all things. See, ego is separateness. Essence is oneness. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand our sense of self to include everything and everyone, and this creates a sense of oneness. So again, we don't have to battle the ego in this idea of separateness. Instead, we're just going to engage a practice that has us envision ourselves expanding to include the entire universe. Now, this particular practice is one of the reasons why the book is called Expansion Mastery. I have spent many, many years engaging both of these practices. So you only need one. You can use both if you like, but you really only need one. So I would recommend seeing which approach appeals best to you. Just dissolving something away or expanding yourself to include all things. You can see what I said earlier. If we want to look through a dualistic vision, we can see these things as being very different approaches. And indeed they are. The first one, using no mind, is meditation, authentic, pure meditation. This version is a meditative practice. The basic idea of the second practice is to sit in a meditative position, again, where you won't be interrupted or anything, and you use visualization. So with this, you're going to sit and you envision your aura. Let's say an orb or a sphere around yourself of energy. And you don't have to pay attention to what color it is or anything like that. Just let it be what it is. It doesn't matter. Essentially, what you're going to do is to see this sphere around you glowing brightly and allow this sphere to start to grow in size very gradually. So when you first begin engaging this particular practice, maybe the sphere only expands a little bit for that practice. That's okay. Don't be in a rush to get to bring in the whole universe. That's not the focus of this. You allow yourself to get there, because rushing it isn't going to help you. It's just going to be a fake visualization. Okay? What we're looking for is to slowly start to open and expand that energy sphere, to start to include the things around you in the room. Start to include the people around you in the same home. And as you do this, you pull them into your sphere. And the idea is, if anything and anyone that is inside of this sphere is you, is part of you, is just another manifestation of you. And then you keep going past the room you're in, the home you're in, the neighborhood you're in, the city that you're in, the county that you're in, the state that you're in, and then you go as far to encompass the continent you're on, and then you keep going until you can include everything and everyone in the entire world. The entire globe is inside this sphere, is inside of you. You are one with everything. And you think about everything that's there, all the animals and the insects and the trees and the grass and the people and everything and everyone. And you see all of it as a manifestation of you, of yourself. As you do this over time, you will start to realize how you are one with everyone and everything. You have to allow this understanding, this wisdom, to come to you through this practice. Once you can do the world, then you start going out from there. You start to go out and include the galaxy, the other planets, and then you just keep expanding to the known universe as far as your imagination through this visualization method is capable of going. And once you can do that, and that may take you weeks, months, it may even take you several years, it could take you more than that. It all depends. It's different for everyone. But as you get there and you can honestly not only envision this in your mind's eye, but you can feel it. You understand. Your heart is opening along with this energy sphere, and everything and everyone is connected to your heart. When you can do that, you spend as much time in the practice as you desire at that point. And then you start to condense it. You start to bring it back in, and you're keeping everything in the universe with you, but you start to shrink that energy sphere. Nothing gets left out. Nothing gets pushed out. You're just bringing it all the way back to you, all the way back to condense it into the size of the tip of a pin that then goes into your heart center. And you hold the connection to everything and everyone in your heart at all times. So you see, the idea of expanding yourself and connecting to all of these other things, what happens is your identity starts to go away. Through this expansion, you essentially end up dissolving your sense of self because you become everything and everyone. And everything and everyone is in you. This is the nature of connection, of oneness. So you hold a sense of unconditional love and connection to all things, everyone, everywhere, without exception. Without exception. You cannot have a single exception. If you create a sense of separateness in any way, you will be invoking the ego. So we must include everything and everyone. Something you don't like still has to be included. Someone you don't care for still has to be included. And you want to become capable of feeling love and connection to them as well, to everyone and everything without exception. And then you see yourself in everyone and everything, again, without exception. As you do this, the ego dissolves away. And like I said, if we look at these two practices as dualistic, as being very different, we can see that they both end with the same type of occurrence of the ego just simply dissolving away and being no more. So even with the second one, there is no sense of struggle and fight and battle. There's none of that. Again, just the opposite of any of that. Now, when I work with clients and students, I choose one of these methods, the one that, based upon their demeanor, fits them the best, and then I guide them through this personally and make sure that they go through it correctly and safely so they have the best chance for success in engaging this type of practice. So there you have it. These are two of the most powerful, most effective methods for actually overcoming the ego. And as I've had to state on many occasions to people, simply being nice, simply smiling at people and believing that we are a nice person, being a nice person, does not mean that you don't have ego. It does not mean that the ego isn't present. Okay? That is a false illusion that we have concocted in our own mind. It's an ego defense mechanism that allows it to protect itself. So unless we have engaged one of these practices or another like it, our mind is still dominated by ego. We are not seen through the eyes of essence, which make it possible for us to live a fully engaged life. Please make sure and visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. I'm going to be putting new blog posts up and doing much more with the website. The first module of the Breathing Mastery program is going to be uploaded here very, very shortly, so you will have that available. Please make sure and buy your autographed copy of Expansion Mastery and get the ebook as well. Make sure that you are sharing this podcast with all of your family and friends, and support us on social media. Like, subscribe, do all of that social media stuff for us. And together we can get real, authentic practices out to benefit people the way it should. Until next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in transcending your ego, succeeding in your practices, and enjoying the adventure of your life. Take care.